Good morning, everyone. Everyone, please grab a chair, table, or other piece of furniture that you wish. Welcome to the 16th Annual CERIAS Symposium. You'll recognize, of course, 16 is an important number in a number of ways for those of us who work in computing. We try to do things in powers of 2, and we've made it to 16. I hope you're all with us for 32 as well. Some, not all of you, have been to all of these. Congratulations to those of you who've managed to show up at all of these despite the variety of weather conditions and events that have gotten in the way. And whether it's your 16th year first, we're very, very pleased to have you here. We have an exciting program ahead, and we hope that you'll enjoy it and learn some things, particularly to learn some more about what our wonderful students and faculty have been doing in the area of security, privacy, and cybercrime. Let me start off, however, with a little bit of administration kind of details. First thing, as a measure of respect for our speakers, please put your cell phones on mute or vibrate or electrocute or whatever it is you may have on it, but please make it silent in the process. If you need to use the facilities, i.e. plumbing, go out the door and to your right, it's down here at the close to the end of the hall. We're in Indiana, the Midwest. If you're not aware of that, it is early. Hopefully you've had your coffee. And you've probably noticed it isn't quite spring-like outside. The weather here is very changeable. And according to the weather forecasts, we may have as much as a 40-degree temperature swing between now and tomorrow afternoon. Such extremes of weather have a tendency to create thunderstorms and high winds. We are in an area where severe weather can occur. So for those of you who are not from right around here at the Purdue campus, should you hear sirens go off in the background, those are warning sirens, and it is an indication that we should all, in a calm, orderly fashion, pick up our valuables and any valuables that someone is careless enough to leave behind, go out the doors, either direction to a stairwell, and go all the way down to the basement or the sub-basement until an all clear occurs. It's unlikely that we'll have a problem, but at least 2 previous symposia, we have had the excitement of undergoing tornado drill. So please be prepared. We will announce things on the schedule as they happen. There are going to be a few minor adjustments along the way, as might be expected with having something a little complex. If you need anything in particular, then please see the people out at the registration desk or one of the staff. So if they're in here, Lori, are you here? Lori, why don't you stand up? Lori, Marlene, Randy, Joel is over there, Adam, Mike at the camera. We have a student helper, Alyssa. Is she here? This afternoon. So please see them. They can solve almost any problem. They are also responsible for organizing this. So if all goes well, please thank them. If anything goes wrong, you can blame me. But they're the ones who do the work. So please thank them for that. And you might also wish Mike a happy birthday. Today's the day for him. I don't want this to be a distraction, but I will mention it because some of you have seen the email, or there are some rumors about. There was a note released this morning by the Dean of the College of Science announcing that I am not going to be reappointed as Director of CERIAS. There will be comments and some future plans on that posted and described later, but don't let that take away from the wonderful program and the things that are going on today. We have a number of wonderful speakers lined up, and of course the focus on the research and the students is why we're here today. One of the speakers that I have the pleasure of introducing is Dr. Debasish Dutta, or Deba as he likes to be known. He is our Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost. Prior to coming to Purdue, Professor Dutta spent 5 years as the Associate Provost and Dean of the Graduate College at our neighboring school, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. From 1989 to 2009, he was a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Michigan, another one of our Big Ten neighbors. During 2004 to 2007, he served at the National Science Foundation, where he co-led IGERT, one of the largest cross-directorate programs at NSF. Some of his research interests include sustainable manufacturing, global product development, and life cycle management, as well as the impact of globalization on product and technology development. Dr. Dutta earned his PhD in industrial engineering right here at Purdue, which shows you can go on and do great things with the Purdue degree, but we knew that. So we're very happy to have him back here at Purdue, serving as provost and giving us some introductory remarks this morning. Please join me in welcoming our provost, Deba Dutta. Just press it briefly.
Thank you, Professor Stafford, and good morning, everyone. So, if I may, how many of you are from the academy? Okay. So the rest of you, I assume, are from industry or federal government. Since Gene was kind enough to introduce me and repeated that I'm the provost, so many of you probably do not know, like my daughter, when I got selected to be the provost, she's a third-year student, a junior in college, doing physics, and she said, "Dad, what's a provost?" I said, "You go to your university, you don't know that?" "No, we only know the president, and we know the deans." And I said, "I'm the guy who hides between these two. So nobody knows what a provost is, what a provost does. That's the job I want." There you go. So thank you very much. But as you know, the provost typically is the chief academic officer here at the university. And it is a great job. It is a great job. It's a challenging job at an institution like Purdue. And one of the things that I really enjoy doing as a part of this job is coming to events like this, which focus on serious research, serious education, serious security. I was really interested in hearing what this center does. I read a little bit about it. So, as Gene mentioned, it is the 16th annual. Thank you everyone for coming, and I too will encourage and hope that you will be here for the 32nd. It is fitting that we are here to discuss assurance and security. You probably know that this is, at Purdue, the first formal department of computer science nationally, right? That was established in 1962. By the end of that decade, there were 10 faculty, and the undergraduate program had started. And the first 200 master's degrees were awarded by the end of the decade. We wouldn't reach the first 200 undergraduate until a few years later. So it shows you that the focus was, at that point, from the get-go, on graduate studies. 70s brought a new term to our world, the virus, with names like rabbit and animal and so on and so forth. The early break-ins, as you probably know, were not malicious. These were sort of fun things that guys and girls did just to see how far they would go. But all good things must come to an end, and they did. In the 80s, we got the computer worm that entered our computers and our new vernacular. 1988, the Morris worm which this gentleman knows very well right here, spread extensively in the wild. And Gene Spafford discovered the Morris worm. He reverse engineered it and developed methods to stop and remove the malware from infected machines. So it really was an accomplishment that still stands out today in this world of cybersecurity. In 1992, Gene co-led the formation of COAST, the Computer Operations, Audit, and Security, a new laboratory then in the 30-year-old computer science department at Purdue. And 6 years later, 1998, CERIAS was formed. And today it combines the good work of over 100 faculty members from various departments and various colleges. So this is truly an interdisciplinary field. And let me share with you how naive I was. Gene mentioned I used to be at the National Science Foundation. Yes, I spent 3 years there. And in my second year, it was a partnership with the Department of Defense that the National Science Foundation started a program in broadly focused on the detection of IEDs. So that was in 2004. The war was going on. And in the TV news every evening, you would hear IEDs, IEDs, IEDs. So I was a part of the group that was charged to develop this new program in partnership with the Department of Defense. And the point I want to make is I went into this event thinking that it's all engineering and computer science. But I was very surprised that it turned out to be equally spread in the NSF directorate, involving the social and behavioral scientists, SBE, the psychologists and the folks who better understand or try to understand how people think about these things. So it was a very interesting experience for me. And when I think about cybersecurity and worms, I'm always taken back to those days when I and many others thought this is going to be engineering and computer science, but no, it wasn't. It really wasn't. So I'm very mindful of that. Since inception, CERIAS has helped launch numerous academic cybersecurity activities and centers all around the country, and it still continues to shape the way we partner with effective partnerships with industry. Cybersecurity affects us all. It's not only the federal government, not only the folks in industry like yourself, but in academic world just as much, to the individuals itself. So it is a topic that is of interest to us all. We are very proud that about a third of the cybersecurity PhDs have come from Purdue. That's quite an accomplishment. That's more than the next 3 universities combined, I'm told. That really is an accomplishment. Our graduates contribute to the research on this topic at universities all around the country and the world. And yet the global need for professionals in this area continues to outpace the production of individuals in this area. The Department of Labor employment information for security analysts is projected to grow 37% from 2012 to 2022 in this decade, much faster than the average for all other occupations, according to the Department of Labor. So really an important field. And I just want to say that, that Purdue has a strong commitment to serious research, serious education, and partnership with industry, that CERIAS has initiated is widely recognized for. And today, this annual symposium is really a part of that multidimensional engagement that Purdue has on this topic. I was also mentioning to our keynote speaker who's going to follow me that when I was at the University of Michigan for the last, well, I started my career after graduating from here at Michigan. I was there for 20 years, and I did know about the Arbor networks that Farnham Jahanian had started. It was, and a lot of activities also at University of Michigan. So it's good to see folks from Big Ten institutions taking the lead. Finally, we are deeply honored that you are here this morning. Yes, last week was spring break. The weather was much better than what it is. I was in the Middle East. I really got it. The hot weather, and I come back, snow, like what we had yesterday. But anyway, I do wish all of you a very successful, stimulating, and productive 2 days, 2.5 days. Look forward to seeing you again. And I wish you all the best and this conference all success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, we're going to now hear from one of our two keynote speakers. This person is a friend of the center. He's been here in other guises over the years. Sam Curry has 20 years of experience in the field. His focus has largely been at the intersection of really significant technology and customers' problems, applying the technology to solve those. He's currently with Arbor Networks. He's the Chief Technology and Security Officer. So he has a very large role. He is filling a role that actually at many places they have 2 people to do. So he's particularly able. We're glad he was able to get here because in his role as development and implementation of Arbor's strategy and innovation roadmap, he brings a great deal of insight to what they do, and he's going to share some of that with us today. Previously, Sam was with MicroStrategy, where he held the role of Senior Vice President of Information Security and Chief Information Security Officer. And before that, he had a number of roles at RSA, including the Chief Technology Officer for Identity and Data Protection, and the role of Chief Security Officer. That keeps coming back. Sam has held a number of senior roles at McAfee and Computer Associates, among other companies. He speaks at a number of other venues, so you may have heard him before or you will hear him again. He always has interesting things to say. He's quoted as a subject matter and technology expert, and he's going to now tell us some very interesting things from his experience. Please join me in welcoming Sam Curry. You live?
Thank you. I think so. Is it? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? All right. We're just going to bring up the PowerPoint. Clicker? I just clicked it forward. That works. Okay. So, folks, thank you, Spaff. I appreciate that. It's my goal here to lead an interesting conversation and hopefully set the tone for some of the discussion for the next 2.5 days. And I'm going to harken back to some things that the provost said as well. His surprise, I think, and I hadn't expected him to make these comments, but his surprise on the importance of the social and understanding some of the psychological impacts with IEDs, I think is as true here in our main domain, in the cyber domain, as it is in the physical domain. And in thinking about how to kick this off, I wanted to emphasize that. I want to emphasize that understanding at least 2 sets of people, both those who practice security. You heard that 37% number, right? It's great news for the students in the room. However, we aren't going to be producing enough graduates fast enough. It is incumbent upon us as an industry to make it a more accessible domain and, frankly, to improve the tools that we use and the ways that we interact with information, and to bring the human to the top. And it also behooves us to understand the bad guy better. And so I entitled this presentation an Agile Security Manifesto. I could as easily have said it's about putting the human into security and keeping that foremost in our thoughts, even when we're doing some of the most technical research and engineering. And I'm used to presenting, by the way, on all of the latest and greatest in cryptography and hacks like everyone else. But I think it's much more important to discuss the human dimension, because fundamentally this is a human versus human conflict. Machines are tools in that conflict. So this isn't what vendors usually show. Who's this guy? Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate that. As Spaff mentioned, I am CTO and CSO, and this was an experiment by our CEO. I am both a practitioner of security and my own vendor in some ways. And that's unusual. Usually CSOs and CTOs are at odds. And the hope was that we would, at least as a company, forget the fact that we sell some security products and networking products, we would be able to start putting security much more central to what we do and how we do things. And you're going to see some black screens like this. I'll use these to ask some questions of the audience and to break the flow of PowerPoint and maybe tell some anecdotes. How many here, by show of hands, by the way, have dealt with agile development in general? So you're familiar with the principles. How many of you have taken those principles to security? Much smaller show of hands. and I heard someone once say that part of the human experience is being able to hold two mutually exclusive beliefs wholly at the same time. So I want you to break that down a bit. Right? I read actually that it might be an evolutionary benefit that if you find two tricks that work, you keep them both. You don't try to reconcile them. At least primitive people did. So I'm going to ask you to reconcile them. Really force some thinking about why we do agile development, because a majority of you have been involved in that, and yet we don't take the same principles to security. And I'm going to use these screens to do that. So this is the only Arbor slide. As mentioned, we were founded by Dr. Farnham Jahanian of University of Michigan with a DARPA grant, and we happened to be at the right place at the right time, if you think of it that way, because so many distributed denial of service attacks occurred suddenly. And then they started to spike as a tool of choice that we really are probably best known as the anti-DDoS company. So we just so you know about us, I'm not going to be talking about DDoS today except as how it fits, but we have been in this space for 14 years, and suffice to say we're a big company. But what this does is I've actually built, or I've inherited, I should say, I'm working on building the next generation of it, a world-class research institute into how the bad guys behave and how their technology behaves and so on. And so that's where I'm coming from today, but I promise that's the last slide on us today. So what's really happening in security? I took the principle of combined arms. So combined arms is a philosophy that rather than have in the military a unit of infantry, a unit of cavalry and artillery and so on, and having them all separate, that as you bring their effects together, and of course air power, as you bring them together, they become much more effective in achieving aims and missions. And so why is an anti-DDoS company talking today? Because frankly, DDoS is a symptom right here. So I make most of my money as a company selling stuff that stops DDoS. But it is actually not a thing that needs to be stopped. It's a symptom of something else. DDoS is a set of tactics and tools that are used by bad guys, right? And I use that term in quotation marks because it can be a crutch. It's used as a tool to achieve ends. The actual problem isn't DDoS, it's the people behind it, and what motivates them and what enables them to do DDoS attacks or other forms of attacks. So I don't like seeing brands of victims on screens, but this was interesting. So the Sony DDoS attack may have been a smokescreen. How many of you here, some of you have done forensics, how many of you are familiar with Locard's principle? Right? That is that whenever a crime occurs, there's an exchange of physical evidence between a criminal and a crime scene. Right? So there's two things you can do if you want to commit murder. Please don't do these. Right? The first is you can do what you see in the movies all the time. Right? Some mastermind says, I know how to beat the investigators. They shave their head, they duct tape themselves, they wear spandex, they tiptoe around, they kill someone, and they take out a dustbuster. Right? Clean up the evidence. The other way is what you really shouldn't do, is you go around for a long period of time collecting hair samples and dirt samples, and then you spread them around the crime scene before, during, and after a murder, right? That's changing the signal-to-noise ratio to make it very difficult to find the bad guys. And this notion of a distraction is important because if you're going to carry out a cyber activity of some sort, and much as I don't like the term cyber, it's becoming quite popular, you want to hide the evidence. And you also want the good guys, the defenders, to be acting like a 5-year-old soccer team, right? The ball goes over and they all chase it. And they all chase it and they run away from where you really are doing the damage. So it is both a smokescreen and a distraction. It's a diversionary tactic. Some examples. Well, first of all, this is DDoS and botnets that are part of an advanced threat campaign. An advanced threat campaign is actually a sequence of attacks and coordinated activities in a combined arm sense to achieve an aim, of which DDoS is just one of the combined arms. It's the equivalent of the artillery, perhaps. But there's others, and the objectives aren't just to take out a service, deny availability in the confidentiality, integrity, availability scheme. It's, in fact, to achieve something else. This is a single IP address, an attacker that has both DDoS and advanced threat malware, in this case, Dark Comet associated with it. This is showing, essentially, that Dark Comet, and here's another one with several. These are using banking remote access Trojans, and they're being used for multiple purposes. If we stare at the symptoms, we're going to think we're onto some things, but we haven't really started looking at the patterns from the people behind it. And in fact, we're going to see in a little bit that the bad guys themselves, they often change hats. Right? The actual attackers sometimes work for a government agency in a nation state, and then they have a business on the side in the evening where they make money. Right? That notion of a 14-year-old kid in the basement, or people having fun taking out the kernel on old mainframe systems, of that being the hacker mainstream is not only old, it's completely outdated. Much more sophisticated. And in some cases, and we'll get to this, the bad guys, in fact, produce tools and publish them to make hacking easier. Right? In some ways, they've even gone agile themselves in their development. Right? They've started to think of users. Why? To plant tools in a kleptographic fashion that they can then exploit to take over in the event that they have to do state-to-state or state-to-non-state actor activities. So let's look at the dark side a little and dig into this. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Now these two explore this a bit. If you know yourself but not the enemy, every victory gained will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you'll succumb in every battle. And so if there's a theme to this presentation, to this keynote, it's that we do need to know the human dimensions, both our own and the opponent's, in order to start winning this battle. So why are there risks? Well, Willie Sutton, it's a false attribution, actually. I'm sure some of you can Google it and find out who really said it. But it said, why do you rob banks? And he said, it's easy. That's where the money is, right? Which seems to make some sense. And so you've got a motivated, financially motivated, hacking per dollars group of people who are out there looking to make money. If you build something valuable, there will always be people who want to take shortcuts or look to break and take advantage of the system. I would argue that probably since before the time of the pyramids, as soon as you try to build something, somebody out there is trying to take it down, right? Or they're trying to find an angle. I don't know if Egyptians suffered from bad contractors, but right, this happens. It's probably even healthy behavior for a body in spite of reprehensible behavior. And what I mean by that is, I'm not going to laud hackers in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of their activity is probably helping to make us build things better. In some ways, knowing that there's an opponent, having to have patch cycles, having to be current and think of security as an ongoing process might be healthy. Okay, I'm not going to get too existential on it, but it is a pain. It is a problem, and it puts some of us, it can really affect some of our careers. There are lots of actors, but I'm going to focus on two. And I know you have many models for actors, right? Hacktivists and non-state actors and so on. I care about those who are financially motivated, where I can quantify gains and losses. They run like businesses. And like businesses, they can be tracked and predicted. And I care about those who don't work for financial gains. Their trade-offs are a little bit different. They're more patient. They're more persistent. They take time. They stockpile resources for attacks. And I'll grossly characterize these as cybercrime and APTs. And I put two words at the end. Think battleships, think submarines. So for cybercrime, if you find it, squash it, right? If you find somebody who is stealing money and they're getting away with it and they're making a profit per hack, the objective is to hit them in the pocketbook. Make it not financially beneficial for them to hack. Make them lose money because they're businesses. All right, so that's one mindset that the defenders have to have in dealing with them. But I'm going to draw battleships as the other one, as submarines rather, for advanced persistent threats or whatever your term of choice is. That is, if you squash them, you're probably going to lose them. They'll go silent. And the objective with these guys is to win in the long term, not over any particular hack they may be executing. So, dealing with the bad guys, it's about the human at the center of the cyber threats. There is a person or group of people in the center, and they have an array of things at their disposal. Let's see, does this have, nope, okay. So they have, on the left here, some distributed denial of service type things, up to state exhaustion and application layer attacks, sabotage, system network owning, insider corruption, kleptography, and there's a lot more in this array. But they sit at the center of a network of options that they can execute. And their job in many cases is confidentiality violations, integrity violations, and availability. We've all seen cyber kill chains, right? Their job is to be able to come back with impunity, and they have an array of tools at their disposal. So as an anti-distributed denial of service company, I deal with the stuff over on the left for the most part. But understanding these people in the center is my mission at the company, and it should be your mission as well. Understanding the opponent as a human being. What the provost earlier talked about was the social and behavioral side of IEDs was very important to being able to actually come up with an engineering solution and, frankly, an ultimate solution to the problem, which, by the way, isn't that IEDs go away forever. It is, in fact, that they become an acceptable, measurable, quantifiable thing that is dealt with via processes. Because you know what? The people who make IEDs, they adapt. They change. And whatever solution you come up with is a pure engineering solution. And this is as true for IEDs as it is for anything, and cyber in particular. An intelligent opponent, given time, will beat it. I'll go so far as to say, much as I hate signatures, right? You saw, I think you heard in the intro, I used to work for McAfee. I was chief security architect there. Signatures and content races are a consequence of just applying technology with an architectural breakthrough. You will wind up in a content race given an intelligent opponent. So we need to find better ways of using our own people. I put this slide in here. I just said, look, if you went back sometime in 2005, we had very neat categories. The purpose of this is to show that they're all slightly separated, but they're becoming more mixed. I mentioned that they have often different jobs. They have different career paths. You know, the person who works for a state during the day, at night, maybe has a job as a cyber criminal, and somebody who makes money for profit. They often change organizations that they work with, and some of them spy on each other. And so the lines are becoming very blurred to the point where I don't think it will make as much sense in the future to talk about these categories as clearly as we do now. And there's probably some really good research to be done in tracking the motivational side of different groups and how they change over time. I published a paper, if you happen to have, I'll make this interactive, if you happen to have a computer open in front of you, you can look up, it's called Towards the Law of Malware Probability. I published a paper about applying game theory, and I know there's been some research done on this as well. When you are dealing with financial crime, the probability of an attack is proportional to measurable things. It's an ROI equation. So the likelihood that somebody will engage in a particular vector of attack is proportional to the attractiveness of a target using that vector. That's the numerator. Things like the number of victims, the amount of money per victim that you can get, the speed with which you can infect a group of people, and the size that that population can get to, as well as a cash-out coefficient. The denominator, the things that detract, right? The things that are going to drive you less likely to use a particular vector, so you can compare two, which is where game theory works best, is looking at things like how long it takes to make something, the cost to do it. And if we have a skill set problem on finding defenders, they also have a skill set problem finding people to hack. Right? Good quality hackers are a big a raw material almost. They're extremely important. So the skill set, the hosting costs, and defenses, and of course R is risk. What's your likelihood of going to prison or getting shot? Right? The chance of getting caught and the penalty. Now this is fairly predictable, but it goes out the window when you're not dealing with financial motivation. Because in that case, you're not just looking for somebody who's going to work for profit. You're looking at people who have a mission to fulfill for their national agenda. So, having dealt with the bad guys, and I would give you the first mission over the next 2.5 days is to keep them in mind. Whatever sources you want to turn to as the symposium unfolds. Let's also look at the good guys. So, by show of hands, how many of you have heard of this term, And it may not catch on, I don't know. How many of you have heard of Homo sapiens informaticus? One. Anyone else? Not many. Okay, so this is fun. It's found that in most relationships, by the way, there's a sort of specialization of some roles. And sometimes it breaks down along gender lines. But for instance, I used to be much better at knowing when certain events were happening. My wife has taken that, right? She used to be pretty good at navigating. She can't do it at all now. I do it, right? So there's a specialization of functions in couples. And if any of you are in a permanent relationship, you probably know what I'm talking about. If someone dies in a couple, there's not just the grief of losing that person. You actually have to figure out, again, how to do things that you haven't had to do before, or you haven't had to do in a very long time. There's that, this is gone. And I have news, we're all in a relationship with the internet, right? And so this is the notion of things that we used to do for ourselves now going away. I mean, when I used to take math, we weren't allowed calculators in the classroom, right? Some of you may remember that. Now, my goodness, that's really old school, right? So this notion that you actually outsource core functions and change the way that you think and operate is what it means to be Homo sapiens informaticus, that this is in fact a different human experience. And if any of you have ever heard of the Anthropocene, that's the same thing about the Earth and not quite as pleasant. But this notion that digital technologies increase the vista for human experience. And I challenge people now to, in their own, for yourselves, do this. Where does the digital world begin and the physical one end, and vice versa? Right? Some of you are probably tweeting. Some of you are probably blogging and reading things. You don't need to know where things are anymore. You just have to remember the pointers to get there. Sorry, this keeps advancing. So the world is global, everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's social. It's about people, not tech. There's new privacy mores. Very big changes in human experience. It's mobile, an app revolution, smart objects, moving beyond phones. So what's this presentation really about? It's about a human experience. So on the positive side, our job in technology is, in fact, to enable that vision. I'm going to talk about, towards the end, not Internet of Things, because that's focusing on technology. I'm going to emphasize something called an Internet of Me, right? It probably in a previous generation would be thought of as maybe psychologically damaged, but there are generations that will now grow up in an egocentric world that's magical, that brings them a world that they don't even have to think how the information arrives. And partly it's our job to do that. Because if you can imagine a world where when I walk into a room, the lights dim or change to how I want, the music changes, things are brought to me. If you've seen the movie Brazil in a creepy way, right, it comes to you, or I think it was Minority Report. But it is egocentric. Now, if you can imagine somebody taking that away from you, wow, that would be a shattering experience. If you've had to go somewhere where you don't have internet access for a few days now, it can be tough. So our job is to prevent that from being abused in some ways, and that's the positive side. I was asked by a German reporter in 2008 at the RSA conference, when will we finally solve this security problem? And I said, I was literally baffled. I said, well, we aren't, right? It would be like saying, when will we finally overcome human violence? We may, but we probably won't be human anymore at that point. Right? The human experience has in it something about our societies that, in fact, make it very difficult to call this a problem to be solved. It's, in fact, the wrong question to ask. The right question is, when will we finally begin to get this security thing under control? Or when will we be able to embrace the full speed with which we could get to Homo sapiens informaticus, or some other term, some other vision for where we're heading? So the purpose of security, I would say, is to enable society to embrace the potential of new emerging technologies. It is not about, we must not inhibit, or with crippling risk and threats, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we should explore a new emergent condition of what it means to embrace all these technologies. It's an exciting time. So why are there brakes on a car? Any answers? So you can go fast. It's not so you can stop, right? Okay. Now we're going to get into, a little bit into Agile. I like this. The more they overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain. True in software? Yeah? Very true. Because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, and I had to do this just because Leonard Nimoy recently passed away. This is a very important concept. that the needs of the end user at the end are what we should be focusing on. Whether they're the end user in Homo sapiens informaticus or whether they're a security practitioner, that should be our focus here, right? So let's talk about Agile. For those of you who know Agile, I could have chosen a lot of material to put here. I chose some stuff from actually agilemanifesto.com. The values are on the second of each of these pairs, but there is value there, but the more value is on the first. So it's about individuals and interactions over processes and tools when you're building software. And it explains why people like to co-locate, why they have stand-up meetings every morning, right? Why they stand up to do it. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Don't document something to death to get the perfect vision. In fact, the perfect is the enemy of the good. All right? Instead, it's about working software, which I'll show you in a minute is a bit of a threat to us, right? It's about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I would, in fact, say user collaboration. It's about responding to change over following a plan. The idea behind the Agile Manifesto and about the Agile revolution in security is that you don't try to think a priori of a perfect state and then jump to it over a 2-year period, that you instead go through small iterative changes that produce along the way. And it may not be perfect, but it is good, and it puts the use case at the center. And that's a valuable lesson for us. So some values. The highest priority is to satisfy the customer. Easy and continuous delivery. Welcoming change requirements, even late. That one's a biggie. By the way, we're a source of requirements to most development organizations. Right? We're going to say, we need it to be built this way. We need to do some things, and that's OK to introduce late. So if you do this well, and you're working with a development organization, they will embrace change. Business development working together build projects around motivated people. Motivated people is a big deal. Passion is important in this. Communicate face-to-face. Working software is the #1 metric. It's about sustainable development, attention to technical excellence, simplicity is a virtue and essential, and teams should self-organize. Does this sound like good stuff? Yep. Well, you've got to bring this over to security. So does this look familiar to anyone? See organizational charts? You hear about this group, and you try to define how things move from group to group. And I actually put IT, engineering, and security, but then I said, OK, we'll put this group called users and business over here. And I'm being generous to show overlap, especially in big organizations. There's an argument that most companies over 200 people simply can't do it, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. But it's how to make this stuff work well that is important. And Waterfall, in fact, codifies the relationships between these. Waterfall is one of the old models of software development. But it says there are formal gates and transitions where you pass things back and forth and you approve things with consensus. Notice that users are a separate group. OK. So how many of you heard something like this? We got security right early on. The only problem was the end user, right? I had my password policies just right, and they found a way around it, right? Oh, they used the same one. They just incremented 2 numbers. Or they rotated through them. So we put things in place to make life hard for them. We said you can't use the same one, the same one you've used in the last 10 times or in 3 months or something. The ID10T error, the idiot error, the error is between keyboard and chair, right? Not a good world. And that's what we've got to break out of. So I said, what might Agile look like for security? And I did this little table. These were on the left. This is better than the second column. And does this worry us? So let's look at the first one, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Well, tools are good. They improve security. But we can get involved in joint scrums. We can embed ourselves. We can do the combined arms thing. We can take security people and we can put them with development groups. And I don't just mean, oh, come to me on the 3rd of every month. Go to the stand-up, right? Have a voice in the development process. Second row, working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, that's scary, isn't it? Right? Because we depend on documentation to define security targets. Documentation needed for testing and certification. I would say it's time to find some new tools. There are plenty of new tools that aren't Word that let us do security, right? Or PowerPoint. I once heard you can tell a lot about someone by what their Microsoft Office tool of choice is. Is it Word, PowerPoint, or Excel? Try to stick to people who use Excel, but really stick to people who don't use any. Use some of the new tools. There are tools in the Agile development world, version 1 or Rally, that we can start to implement for security. And if you happen to belong to a software organization, or you're going to be working with a software organization that has them, get accounts. Accounts equals access, access equals participation. Right? So security has to belly up as a player at that table. Customer collaboration of a contract negotiation, that's not so worrying. That actually sounds pretty good for us. And responding to change, following a plan, that's scary and unpredictable. But I would remind you that you are an agent of change. That just as someone can introduce something that's needed for a particular customer requirement, you also have requirements you can introduce to the process. You have to tell your developer colleagues to do that. So I took the value chain from earlier and changed it a little, and I will make this presentation available. This is a thesis. I haven't done a deeper paper on this at this point, but I would say that these are the values that we are going to care about. Highest priority is to protect the customer, and we want to introduce that onto agile processes. We want to early and continuously test and assess in sync with delivery. We will also welcome changing requirements even late. We will deliver secure software frequently. I added italics words are things that I changed from the earlier manifesto. Deliver secure software frequently. Security, business, and development working together. Build projects around motivated people, support them. That doesn't change. Communicate face-to-face. Secure working software is metric number one. Get security metrics into metrics used by the business. Development organizations are metrics driven, especially large ones. So get security in there. Sustainable development, attention to technical security excellence, and the other two don't change. Simplicity is a virtue and essential, and teams should self-organize. This is what it should look like, where every ring looks in. A lot of business folks would look at this and go, I don't like that I'm on the outside. But that is what Agile is about. That is what this revolution is about. And I'm going to say, by the way, as with most things, probably a hybrid is what will work best, because every culture is a little bit different. But it puts the user at the center and then IT, which supports the user, because security comes in the next ring, and engineering has to build things to support all of that. That's our place as a discipline in this world that we're building with cloud apps, with software as a service. That's our place, and that's where we need to inject ourselves, and we need to do some cultural revolution to get there. So let's make this about the user. Anyone here ever seen a child learn to write? A few of you? So they scrunch up their hands, their knuckles go white, right? They burnt their lip. It's painful, right? I mean, if you can only write 3 or 4 words a minute, it looks pretty bad. Same thing is true of students learning to type. In fact, this was embarrassing. I had a millennial, no offense to any millennials in the room, I had a millennial who came to a meeting, and I actually felt really bad. I felt very out of touch, because I asked him to go to the whiteboard, and he said he couldn't write. He could type very, very well, but he didn't have any form of orthography on the board. I was shocked. How did he get through school? Right? It was mind-boggling. So this is about focus on tool, not task. And it has plagued security for a long time. When you're focusing on a tool, you can't actually focus on the task. And that's a very deep point, because you guys have been working, you're coding, you're writing music, you're writing a paper, whatever, and the phone rings, you get angry. It's a natural response. Somebody's pulled you out of what you're doing, so you ignore it. You go back, you start writing, and it rings again, and you get more angry, right? That person keeps pulling you out of your work. Focusing on tool, not task, continuously pulls you out of your work. It doesn't actually let you get to the higher order stuff. It's like working with a business process tool, and I'm sure we've all had them in our companies and in our schools and so on, that is all about figuring out how the tool works to get a job done. Incredibly frustrating, right? I can think of several examples in my career. So I want you to now picture having to hire thousands of people for incident response. We have to get user-centric. We have to enable focus on the task, not on the tool. Because we're going to have to bring a whole bunch of people who've never done security up to a level where they're thinking security, not thinking how do I get data, not thinking how do I make a tool work, not thinking have I got my password right. So users aren't the problem. They are, in fact, the environment. And that Internet of Me that I talked about is an egocentric, magical, compelling, and disruptive world. We want security to be part of that fabric. And it will pass us by, and we'll find ourselves later going, stop. Don't forget to put this control in place. That's a problem. And I would say, by the way, You've all heard people talking in the security industry about intelligence, right? We need more intelligence. We have intelligence. It's just it's carbon-based, not silicon-based, right? We've got to make tools instead of pursuing perfect AI-like responses in security. And by the way, if we ever made one, there'd be an AI for offense as well. And it would probably be like Marvin the Paranoid Android from Hitchhiker's Guide and very bored with the job of security. So our job is, in fact, to make it an exciting place to do work, something that is accessible and attainable without having to go through the tough learning curves we did when we were doing things like sniffing traffic and figuring out how to do it, and reverse engineering Mollusk. Right? I've run 3 research labs, and I've had to figure out every time how to process more. The tools were a pain. We've got to produce them, and we've got to produce them better. So some implications of user-centric agile security. First of all, research. Keep doing what the deep research we do. But as you're doing research, bring in this notion of the human being. If it's not there, then you must introduce it. I have a pet peeve. I've been an architect now since 91. I was a cryptographer in the old days. If you see a whiteboard or a diagram and there isn't a person in the picture, ask yourself why. Because very often we draw a network diagram, a couple machines talking. Where's the person? Put the person in the picture. If they don't fit, they don't fit. But ask yourself that question every time. So what new cross-disciplinary research could and should we do? One thing I love about CERIAS is when I first came to see you guys, the other departments that were involved with information security beyond just CS. Right? That is a big advantage to an academic that an academic institution has. You bring cross-disciplinary excellence and depth to information security. Doctrinal. This is big for me. How should security operations work? I'm building a team where I don't have a large staff. I work for a company with about 500 employees. Right? Most companies can afford about 1% as security staff. It's seen as a tax. So how should security operations work? Where should it be done? The most mature security organizations I know, in fact, take most of what we call security and they move it to IT ops. They move it, they don't do antivirus updates. They don't do the vulnerability patch lifecycle. They do governance, and they do incident response. They train themselves to be excellent and deep, and they train themselves to be scalable and parallel processing, so they're not like the 5-year-olds chasing the soccer ball. But where does security, what should security operations, how should they work? How should security processes change, and how should policies change as a result of being human-centric, right? By the way, if I call, I love this, my first day at Arbor, and this is true everywhere, I saw a couple things going wrong. I didn't flag them, I'm starting to do that now. And I called up someone in IT, and it rang like 8 times before he answered, and I thought to myself, he's worried I found something, right? Just the title, CSO, or CISO, says your doctor no. Right? That perception has to change. Operational. Where does security belong? How should teams reorganize? And what does security by Scrum look like? Would you believe I actually found sales by Scrum? Sales and marketing are being agile, and security is not caught up. Remember the show of hands I had earlier, how many went up have been involved with agile and how many do it in security? Political. To what degree should certifications like Common Criteria or FIPS change? Right? What new standards should NIST and peers like them produce, and how should regulations adapt? Not many things like PCI or HIPAA or fill in the blank, not many of them say, oh, you should be involved in daily builds or weekly builds or sprints or increments. And ethical. Are there new rights to factor into what we do and how we do it? I didn't dive too deep into this. I had a little bit more I was going to present, but is there a first principle, by the way, about enabling individuals and organizations to see and make their own risk-based decisions? Is that something we should protect as a right? How do you bring that into products? How do you bring that into services? How do we do research around it? And how and where should privacy be addressed? So conclusion and some guidance. And I appreciate your time today. I really hope this does help you, certainly for today, in light of what you're going to be seeing as part of the symposium and in your consideration of future work. Agile security is still nascent. It's almost nothing online. If you do a search on it, it doesn't really turn up. There's some there, and this is still early days. A lot about how bad Agile is for security you can find, like people who are threatened by it or don't like it. And as I said, there's sales by Scrum, but I haven't seen security by Scrum. I think it's time to change how we practice security. This group is uniquely suited to helping navigate it, and please consider the principles and the activities of the next 2 days. And don't react to the ideas of agile and user-centrism. Instead, don't say yes, oh, that's not for me, or even if you don't know what to do with it, just put it to one side and gradually start to internalize the principles, how you can do better. It's not going to be about the big changes you make to become agile overnight. It's about taking some of the principles and injecting them into what you do and what new avenues are open. What can you do, especially in the divide between the public and the private sector? There's a big divide here. There's also a big divide between academia and commercial, something we've discussed in the past, SPAF, and CERIAS and other departments and centers at Purdue or in other academic institutions, as I know there are many visitors from other academic institutions. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and wish you a wonderful 2.5 days, and I look forward to talking to you.
Don't go away, Sam. Don't go away for a moment. Thank you very much. A lot of themes there for us to think about. So for any of you who've either run an event or spoken at an event, you know that one of the things that we tend to do is we give a small token of appreciation to our speaker. Our speaker in this case deserves more than a small token. As I mentioned, he has been here before in a number of different guises. He served on our advisory board. He has helped us bring in a few of our partners. He's been a staunch supporter, even went so far as to help when he was at RSA for them to locate their global response center at our technology park that has employed a number of our students and served as a nucleus for some development of some new programs. This is far more than just a speaker, ladies and gentlemen. This is somebody who's a longtime supporter and friend of CERIAS. And as part of that, it is my great pleasure to present Sam Curry with something we use to recognize our special friends and supporters who've done over and above for the center. And Sam, you are this year's Pillar of CERIAS Award winner. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.